Every wedding has its share of drama, but none quite like this. Picture the perfect autumn ceremony at St. Michael's Cathedral. White roses cascading down marble columns, the afternoon sun streaming through stained glass, and Catherine Miller, radiant in her mother's restored vintage gown. Just as she and James are about to exchange vows, the heavy oak doors burst open. A woman in a tailored black suit strides down the aisle, marriage certificate in hand. The whispers start immediately. It's Rebecca, James's ex-wife from 15 years ago. But that's impossible. They'd finalized their divorce, hadn't they? As Rebecca approaches the altar, her words shatter the sacred silence. I'm still legally married to him, but in a town where old money talks and family secrets run deep, is Rebecca telling the truth or orchestrating the perfect revenge? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Boston Beacon Society page had called it a perfect match. James Preston Miller III, scion of the Miller and Associates law dynasty, to wed Catherine Elizabeth Windsor, celebrated historical restoration architect. The announcement, printed just 6 months ago, captured none of the real magic of their first meeting. Catherine hadn't expected to find love while measuring crown moldings at the Harvard Club. She'd been there on business, cataloging architectural details for an upcoming restoration project, when James quite literally stumbled into her life. He'd been backing away from an overly enthusiastic colleague, nose buried in case files, when he'd nearly knocked over her ladder. "I suppose I should watch where I'm going," he'd said, steadying both her and the ladder with surprisingly quick reflexes. His eyes a striking grey-blue that reminded her of winter skies over the Atlantic, had crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Especially when there are women wielding measuring tapes overhead," Catherine had replied, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite the immediate flutter in her chest. At 42, she'd long since given up on the kind of instant attraction young people were always talking about. Yet here it was, catching her completely off guard. James had insisted on buying her coffee as an apology, though they both knew it was an excuse. They'd talked for hours that afternoon, their conversation flowing from historical architecture to corporate law to their shared love of sailing. He'd grown up racing his family's boats off Martha's Vineyard. She'd learned from her father in the waters around Newport. "You're the first person I've met who understands why these old buildings matter," James had told her, gesturing to the club's ornate ceiling. "Most people see excess, but you see stories." "That's exactly it," Catherine had responded, warming to his insight. "Every scratch, every worn floorboard, every patched crack tells us something about the lives lived here. It's like reading time backward." Their courtship had progressed with the same natural ease. Weekend sailing trips turned into quiet dinners at hidden North End restaurants. Long walks through the public garden led to evenings at the symphony. James introduced her to his world of charity galas and board meetings, while Catherine showed him the hidden architectural treasures of the city she'd spent her career preserving. His proposal, 4 months after they met, came during a sunset sail around the harbor. Catherine had been at the helm, her hair whipping in the autumn wind, when James appeared beside her with a small velvet box and a nervous smile she'd never seen before. "I know this might seem fast," he'd said, "but when you find the right person, at our age you don't waste time playing games." The ring had been his grandmother's, a stunning Art Deco piece that seemed meant for Catherine's finger. Of course, there had been whispers. Boston's old money circles loved nothing more than speculation about one of their own. James was too established, too careful to rush into marriage. Hadn't his first marriage ended mysteriously? Wasn't Catherine, despite her impressive career, still essentially an outsider? But James had dismissed all concerns with the quiet authority that marked everything he did. "I learned long ago not to let other people's opinions dictate my happiness," he'd told her one evening, as they reviewed Wedding plans in his Beacon Hill townhouse. That's when Catherine had first tried to ask about Rebecca. The name had appeared in passing during the wedding preparations, usually followed by quick subject changes and awkward silences. All Catherine knew was that they'd married young, barely out of law school, and divorced 2 years later. It was a lifetime ago, James had said, his tone gentle but firm. We were different people then. The marriage was a mistake, the divorce was amicable, and that's all there is to say about it. He'd kissed her temple and changed the subject to flower arrangements. Catherine had let it go, attributing his reticence to the natural discomfort anyone might feel discussing past relationships with their fiancé. Besides, she had her own past. A broken engagement in her 30s. A few relationships that had fizzled out when career ambitions clashed. At their age, everyone had history. The wedding plans had come together seamlessly, almost too perfectly. St. Michael's Cathedral, with its soaring Gothic arches and historical significance, had been Catherine's choice. The date, October 15th, had been James's suggestion, the same day his parents had married 45 years ago. Everything, from the vintage champagne to the hand-calligraphed place cards, spoke of tasteful tradition and carefully curated elegance. "You've made my son happier than I've ever seen him," Margaret Miller had told Catherine during the rehearsal dinner, her words slightly slurred from too many martinis. "Just be patient with him, dear. The men in this family, they carry their burdens silently." Catherine had nodded, filing away the comment with other small oddities she'd noticed, the way James's father changed the subject whenever Rebecca's name came up, the locked drawer in James's home office, the old photos missing from family albums. But, standing in the bridal suite of St. Michael's, watching her mother adjust the restored lace of her grandmother's wedding gown, Catherine had pushed all doubts aside. She was marrying a man she loved, who loved her. Everything else was just background noise. If only she'd paid more attention to that noise. If only she'd asked more questions. If only she'd noticed how James's hands trembled slightly as they prepared to exchange vows. But she hadn't. And so, when the cathedral doors burst open and Rebecca appeared, the past James had so carefully buried came rushing back with devastating force. The Polaroid fell from between the pages of an old law textbook Catherine had borrowed from James's library. A younger James smiled at the camera, his arm around a striking woman with dark hair and determined eyes. They stood on courthouse steps, the woman holding a small bouquet of daisies. The date, scrawled in fading ink, read June 12, 2010. Rebecca Taylor Miller, the woman who now stood defiantly in St. Michael's Cathedral, had been beautiful in a different way back then. Less polished, more alive, her smile reached her eyes in the photograph, something Catherine hadn't seen in the woman's carefully composed face at the altar. "We were just kids," James had told Catherine once, during a rare moment of candor about his first marriage. Fresh, out of law school, ready to take on the world. He'd been sorting through old files in his study, his reading glasses perched on his nose. "Sometimes I barely remember those days." But Catherine now wondered if he remembered more than he let on. The night she found the Polaroid, she'd noticed something else. A letter tucked into the same textbook, dated just 6 months ago. The scene, handwriting matched Rebecca's from the photo. "Your father can't keep this quiet forever," the letter had read. "Some truths refuse to stay buried." The rest had been torn away, but those words were enough to seed doubt in Catherine's mind. She'd done what any architect would do. She started digging into the foundation. The courthouse where James and Rebecca married had no record of their divorce. The private investigator James claimed to have hired to find Rebecca after she disappeared. No trace of any payment, no report filed. Even James's old law partner, Thomas Chen, had given her a strange look when she'd mentioned Rebecca's name during a chance encounter at the courthouse. "That's a history better left alone," he'd said, hurrying away before she could press further. The inconsistencies had piled up like layers of old wallpaper in a historical renovation. Each time Catherine peeled back one layer, she found another pattern of deception underneath. James's mother had let something slip at the final wedding dress fitting. Rebecca was such a fighter, she'd said, then quickly pressed her lips together, as if trying to catch the words before they escaped. I mean, she fought so hard to fit into our world. Catherine had watched Margaret Miller's hands shake as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from the vintage lace. The older woman's eyes had darted around the room, avoiding her future daughter-in-law's questioning gaze. What happened to her, Margaret? Catherine had asked softly. Really? Oh, look at the time, Margaret had replied, gathering her purse with trembling fingers. I'm late for my hair appointment. She'd practically fled the bridal salon, leaving Catherine surrounded by white tulle and growing suspicion. That evening, Catherine had tried one more time to broach the subject with James. They'd been having dinner in his kitchen, going over last-minute wedding details when she'd casually mentioned finding the Polaroid. James's reaction had been subtle but unmistakable. His fork had paused halfway to his mouth, his jaw had tightened, and for just a moment, something like fear had flickered in his eyes. I thought I'd gotten rid of all those old photos, he'd said, his voice carefully controlled. Rebecca and... It's complicated, Catherine. There are things from that time that are better left in the past. Things like what, James? She'd pressed gently. Help me understand. He'd set down his fork and removed his glasses, a gesture she'd come to recognize as his way of creating distance. The past is past. What matters is our future together. But the past had refused to stay buried. Like the historic homes Catherine restored, it had a way of revealing its secrets to those who knew where to look. The hidden doors, the sealed-up passages, the foundations that shifted under pressure. They all told stories if you listened carefully enough. Now, standing in her wedding dress before a stunned congregation, Catherine watched 15 years of carefully constructed history crumble. Rebecca's words hung in the air like dust from fallen plaster, exposing the rot beneath the polished surface of James's narrative. I'm still legally married to him. The proof was in Rebecca's hands, not just a marriage certificate, but a stack of documents that seemed to grow thicker with each step she took toward the altar. James's face had gone pale. His father was half rising from his pew, and somewhere in the back of the cathedral a door slammed. Catherine found herself thinking of all the buildings she'd restored over the years, all the hidden damage she'd uncovered. Beneath beautiful facades, she'd learned early in her career that the most dangerous problems were often the ones that had been covered up rather than properly repaired. As she turned to look at her fiancé, or whatever he was now, Catherine saw what she'd been missing all along. James wasn't just hiding his past, he was terrified of it. And judging by the way his father was now moving purposefully toward Rebecca, the Miller family had been reinforcing that facade of respectability for a very long time. The question was, would it all come crashing down today? Or had Rebecca brought enough evidence to finally expose the truth that lay beneath 15 years of careful renovation? The incomplete divorce papers lay scattered across Catherine's restoration studio desk, their edges yellowed with age. She'd found them in the Suffolk County Courthouse archives, filed under Miller James P. III, but never finalized. The petition, date matched what James had told her, March 2012, but the crucial final decree was missing. In its place was a single handwritten note. Proceedings suspended pending further documentation. Thomas Chen's law office occupied a modest space in downtown Crossing, far from the gleaming towers where Miller and Associates conducted their business. Catherine hadn't planned to visit him, but after discovering the incomplete divorce records, she needed answers from someone who'd known James before the polished facade had been constructed. I wondered when you'd show up, Thomas said, gesturing to a chair across from his cluttered desk. The morning light filtered through dusty blinds, casting striped shadows across his face. though I'd hoped it would be before the wedding invitations went out. You knew, Catherine said. It wasn't a question. About Rebecca, about the divorce. Thomas removed his glasses, polishing them with his tie in a gesture so similar to James's that Catherine felt a pang of recognition. What I know, he said, carefully, would be covered by attorney-client privilege if I still practiced family law, which I don't. Thomas, please. I'm supposed to marry James in 3 weeks, he sighed, replacing his glasses and leaning forward. Have you ever wondered why I left Miller and Associates? Why I went from being James's partner to running a small private practice? James said you wanted more independence. James says a lot of things. Thomas opened a drawer and withdrew a thick manila envelope. 2 days after I filed those divorce papers for James and Rebecca, something happened. Something that made me question everything. I thought I knew about the Miller family. Before he could continue, his office door opened. Rebecca stood in the doorway, elegant in a charcoal suit that made Catherine think of storm clouds gathering. "Hello, Thomas," she said. "I see you're finally breaking your silence." Catherine started to rise, but Rebecca waved her back down. "Please stay. It's time we had a proper conversation, don't you think? Future wife to current wife?" "You're not his wife," Catherine said, but the words lacked conviction. Too many questions had piled up, too many inconsistencies had emerged. Rebecca smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. The law would disagree, and the law is something the Millers usually respect, when it suits them. She turned to Thomas. "Show her the rest of the files." Thomas hesitated, his hand still on the manila envelope. "Rebecca, it's okay, Thomas. The truth was always going to come out. I just wanted it to happen before she made the same mistake I did." The envelope, when Thomas finally opened it, contained more than just legal documents. There were photographs, James with Rebecca at Miller family functions, both looking young and in love. Bank statements showing large transfers from Miller and Associates to offshore accounts. A police report filed by Rebecca in 2012, then mysteriously withdrawn. "James told me you disappeared," Catherine said, studying a photo of Rebecca at a charity gala, wearing the same Art Deco ring that now sat heavy on Catherine's finger. "That he hired investigators to find you. James tells a lot of stories." Rebecca echoed Thomas's words. "The truth is, I didn't disappear. I was made to disappear." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a faint scar that ran from wrist to elbow. "Some accidents aren't really accidents." Catherine felt the room tilt slightly. She thought of Margaret Miller's trembling hands, of James's father's quick subject changes, of all the little warnings she'd dismissed as pre-wedding jitters. "Why come forward now?" "Because I saw your engagement announcement in the Beacon. Because I recognized that look in your eyes, the same one I had 15 years ago. Because some nights I still wake up feeling the car going over the guardrail, hearing James's father tell me it would be better for everyone if I just signed the papers and went away quietly." Thomas cleared his throat. "I found evidence of tampering with the brake lines. When I took it to James, he trailed off, adjusting his glasses again. Let's just say that's when I decided to open my own practice." "James knew." Catherine's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "James knows everything," Rebecca said quietly. "He's his father's son. They protect the family name above all else. I thought I could change him, save him from becoming just like Richard Miller. I was wrong." She placed a business card on Thomas's desk. "When you're ready to hear the whole story, call me, but do it soon. Your wedding is in 3 weeks, and trust me, you don't want to find out the truth the way I did." After Rebecca left, Catherine sat in silence, staring at the scattered documents that told a very different story than the one she'd fallen in love with. Thomas finally spoke. "The Millers, they're like one of those beautiful old buildings you restore. Impressive facade, rotting foundation. The question is, do you walk away or do you try to fix what's broken?" "Sometimes," Catherine said, thinking of all the historical buildings she'd had to abandon when the damage proved too severe. Walking away is the only way to save yourself. She gathered the documents with shaking hands, her architect's mind already cataloguing the evidence like she would damage in a structural assessment. The incomplete divorce papers, the police report, the photographs that showed a progression from love to fear in Rebecca's eyes. As she left Thomas's office, her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Where are you? We have the final tasting at the caterer's." Catherine stared at the message, remembering how James had insisted on handling all the contracts himself, how he'd said it was his gift to her. How many other gifts had come with hidden costs? How many other women had paid the price for loving a Miller man? She thought of her mother's words when she'd first announced her engagement. "At our age, dear, we should know better than to ignore." Red flags. Looking back, the flags had been there all along, as bright as the danger signs she posted on unstable buildings. She just hadn't wanted to read them. The bank statement was dated March 15, 2012, exactly 1 week after Rebecca's accident. A wire transfer of $250,000 from Miller and Associates to an account in the Cayman Islands, followed by a series of smaller payments over the next 5 years. All authorized by Richard Miller, all carefully categorized as consulting fees. Catherine found herself studying the document in her father's wood-paneled library, where she'd spent countless childhood hours learning about load-bearing walls and flying buttresses. William Windsor had taught her that every building had its secrets, but more importantly, he'd taught her how to find them. "I was afraid this would happen," he said, settling into his leather armchair with the careful movements of a man who'd recently had hip surgery. "The Millers have been burying their secrets longer than I've been restoring buildings in this town." "You knew about Rebecca?" Catherine kept her voice steady, though her hands wanted to shake. "Not the specifics, but I knew Richard Miller's reputation from serving on the Historical Society board with him. The man treats people the way developers treat old buildings. If they're in his way, they get demolished." He reached for a folder on his desk. "There's something you need to see." Inside was a 30-year-old newspaper clipping about the death of James's uncle, Robert Miller. The official story was a hunting accident, but the article hinted at family discord over the direction of the law firm. Robert had wanted to focus on environmental law, fighting corporate polluters. He died 2 weeks after winning a major case against one of the firm's biggest clients. "The Millers don't allow anyone to threaten the family legacy," her father continued, "not even their own. And James, is he like his father? That's the question, isn't it?" Her father adjusted his reading glasses. "I've watched that boy grow up, seen him struggle between what's expected of him and what's right, but in the end, the Millers always choose the family." Catherine thought of James's growing agitation as the wedding approached, his late-night phone calls behind closed doors, the way he'd insisted on handling all the legal paperwork himself. "He's been acting strange lately, defensive, and his mother, Margaret." Her father's expression darkened. "Now there's a woman who knows the cost of Miller loyalty. Did you know she was a prosecutor before she married Richard? Brilliant career ahead of her. Then suddenly she resigned, started organizing charity galas instead, never practiced law again." Before Catherine could respond, her phone buzzed. A text from Detective Sarah Chen. "Need to meet. Found something in the cold case files. Courthouse, 30 minutes? "Go," her father said, reading her expression. "But Catherine, be careful. The Millers didn't get where they are by leaving loose ends." The courthouse was quiet this late in the afternoon, most of the day's cases long concluded. Detective Chen waited in an empty conference room, a stack of files in front of her. The detective's normally composed face showed signs of strain. "I've been looking into unsolved cases involving Miller and Associates," she said without preamble. "There's a pattern. Every few years, someone gets close to exposing something about the firm. Then they either disappear, have an accident, or suddenly drop their investigation." She spread out photographs. Robert Miller's hunting accident scene. Rebecca's mangled car at the bottom of a ravine. 3 other cases, all involving people who'd crossed paths with the Miller family. The thing is, Detective Chen continued, these investigations don't just stop. They get buried, high-level buried, the kind that needs judges to sign off on sealed records. Judges who might owe favors to Boston's most prominent law firm? Catherine asked, thinking of all the charity galas and private club memberships that came with the Miller name. Exactly. The detective pulled out one more document, a recent bank statement showing another large transfer from Miller and Associates to an offshore account. This happened yesterday. Same pattern as before Rebecca's accident. Catherine felt her blood run cold. The wedding's in 3 weeks. They know you've been asking questions. Thomas Chen called me after your meeting with Rebecca. He's worried. Detective Chen leaned forward. Catherine, these people, they don't just make problems disappear, they destroy them completely. I need to talk to James, Catherine said, standing. He needs to know what I've found. Be careful. Men like James Miller, sometimes they're more dangerous when they're cornered. The detective handed her a card. My personal number. Call any time, day or night. Driving home through Boston's evening traffic, Catherine's mind raced. The architect in her kept trying to arrange the pieces into a coherent structure. The incomplete divorce, the suspicious accidents, the buried investigations. But another part of her, the part that still loved James, wanted to believe there was an explanation. She found him in his study, phone to his ear, that familiar crease between his brows. We need to handle this, he was saying. No, Father, you don't understand. Catherine's been... He looked up, saw her in the doorway, and his face went blank. I'll call you back. Handle what, James? Catherine asked, stepping into the room. The fact that your ex-wife is still legally your wife? Or the fact that someone tried to kill her when she threatened to expose your family? The silence that followed was heavy, with 15 years of secrets. James removed his glasses, and for the first time, Catherine saw something like fear in his eyes. You don't understand, he began, but Catherine cut him off. Then help me understand. Because right now, all I see is a pattern of violence and cover-ups. All I see is your father's name on bank transfers that precede convenient accidents. All I see is you, becoming exactly what Rebecca warned me about. James stood, his movements careful, controlled. Everything I've done has been to protect... The family name? Catherine finished. Is that what you'll say at our wedding? Till, death do us part unless you threaten the Miller legacy. The way he didn't answer told her everything she needed to know. Rebecca's journal was bound in worn leather, its pages dog-eared and water-stained. She'd handed it to Catherine outside James's office, her face set with determination. Read it, she'd said. Read it all. Then you'll understand why I had to. Come back. The earliest entry was dated June 2010, just after the courthouse wedding. James says his father will come around, that he'll forgive us for not having the society wedding he wanted. But I saw Richard's face when we told him. It wasn't anger, it was calculation, like he was solving a problem. Margaret kept touching her wedding ring, turning it around and around. She knows something. They all know something. Catherine settled, deeper into her office chair, the restoration plans for the Old North Church forgotten on her desk. The journal entries grew darker as she read. September 2010. Found more discrepancies in the Bradley case files. Major chemical company, toxic dumping, children sick in 3 counties. The kind of case that made me want to be a lawyer. But the evidence keeps disappearing from our files. James says I'm imagining things. His father says I should focus on family law instead. Leave the corporate cases to the men who understand them. December 2010. James changed after making partner. He's his father's shadow now, always watching, always careful. Last night I found him in his study, burning papers. He said they were just old client files, but I saw a familiar name. Robert Miller, his dead uncle. The one who supposedly shot himself on a hunting trip, March 2011. Margaret pulled me aside at the Christmas gala. She'd had too much wine, started talking about her early days as a prosecutor. Sometimes survival means keeping quiet, she said. Sometimes love means looking the other way. When Richard appeared, she went pale. Stopped talking immediately. I've never seen such fear in someone's eyes. The entries grew more frantic as time passed. January 2012, I finally have proof. Leaked emails showing Richard authorized payments to silence witnesses in the Bradley case. Evidence of judges being bribed. A pattern going back decades. James must have known, must have helped cover it up. When I confronted him, he just kept saying, "You don't understand how things work in this family." March 1st, 2012. They're watching me. Black SUV following me to work. Phone calls with no one there. James says I'm paranoid, but I saw him meeting with his father late at night. They stopped talking when they saw me. Richard smiled, that smile of his, the one that never reaches. His eyes. The final entry was dated March 8th, 2012, the day of the accident. If you're reading this, something has happened to me. The brake lines on my car were cut last week. I had them repaired without telling anyone. Today, I'm taking everything. I found to the FBI. James says he loves me, but love in the Miller family comes with conditions. They destroy anything that threatens them. Like they destroyed Robert when he tried to expose the truth. Like they destroyed Margaret's career when she wouldn't play along. I won't let them destroy me too. Catherine looked up from the journal, her hands shaking. The next page had a different date, just 6 months ago. 15 years. 15 years of hiding, watching, gathering evidence. I built a new life in Seattle, changed my name, became someone else. But I never stopped looking, never stopped collecting proof. Now there's another woman about to marry into this family. Another life they'll try to control or destroy. I can't let that happen. Not again. The final entry was dated yesterday. Tomorrow, Catherine will become a Miller bride, just like I did, unless I stop it. I have everything now, bank records, witness statements, proof of what really happened to Robert Miller. James's father thinks money can bury anything, but some truths refuse to stay buried. Some ghosts come back to haunt you. Catherine closed the journal, her architect's mind automatically cataloguing connections like she would structural damage in an old building. The Bradley case files, Robert Miller's death, Margaret's silenced career, Rebecca's accident, all load-bearing, secrets in the Miller family foundation. Her phone buzzed, a text from James. "Where are you? We need to talk about what's happening." Another buzz, this time from Detective Chen. "Don't meet him alone. New evidence suggests Robert Miller's death wasn't suicide. They're reopening the case." A third message from Rebecca. "Whatever he says, don't trust him. They all lie to protect the family. Ask him about the night Robert died. Ask him what he and his father did with the real evidence." Catherine stared at her engagement ring, James's grandmother's ring. The same ring she'd seen in old photos. First on Margaret's hand, then Rebecca's, now hers. Not an heirloom passed down with love, but a brand marking Miller property. Her office phone rang. James's father, Catherine. Richard Miller's voice was smooth as aged whiskey. "I think it's time we had a talk about family loyalty, about what it means to be a Miller." She thought of Margaret's trembling hands, of Rebecca's scar, of all the women who'd been silenced by that same smooth voice. "Yes," she said, her own voice steady. "I think it's time we talked about a lot of things, Richard. Like what really happened to Robert Miller 15 years ago." The silence on the other end was all the answer she needed. The surveillance photos spread across Catherine's desk like pieces of a disturbing puzzle. Detective Chen's contact at the FBI had been thorough. Crystal clear images showing James entering the Harborview Hotel at precise intervals over the past month. In each photo, he carried the same leather briefcase, and in several, Rebecca could be seen waiting in the lobby. "He's been meeting with her all along," Detective Chen said, pointing to the timestamps. "Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork. But look at this." She laid down another series of photos. These, showing Richard Miller's silver Bentley, parked 2 blocks away during each meeting. Catherine studied the images with the same careful attention she gave to archival photographs of historical buildings. Details mattered. In the most recent photo, dated just yesterday, James looked haggard, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. Rebecca, by contrast, stood straighter with each successive image, like someone gaining strength with each confrontation. "There's more," the detective continued, pulling out her tablet. "Security footage from the hotel." She played a clip showing James and Rebecca in heated discussion in the lobby. No audio, but their body language told the story. James pleading, Rebecca unmoved. At one point he reached for her arm, and she pulled back sharply, her hand going to her old scar. "Stop the video," Catherine said suddenly. "Go back." She pointed to James's briefcase, open on the lobby table. "There, that folder. Zoom in." The image enlarged, revealing a familiar name. "Robert Miller, the uncle's case," Detective Chen murmured. "After 15 years, why bring those files to Rebecca now?" Catherine thought of the journal entries, of Margaret's cryptic warnings, of all the pieces that had seemed disconnected, but now formed a clear pattern. Because she has something they want, something worth bargaining for. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. "Need to see you. Harborview Hotel, room 712. Come alone." "It's a trap," Detective Chen said, reading over her shoulder. "Of course it is." Catherine gathered the photos. "But it might be our only chance to understand what really happened 15 years ago." The Harborview Hotel stood like an aging dowager against the darkening Boston skyline, its Victorian architecture a reminder of more elegant times. Catherine knew its history, had consulted on its restoration just last year. She knew every service entrance, every back stairwell. She took the service elevator to the 6th floor, then climbed the back stairs to 7. Room 712 was at the end of the hall, overlooking the harbor. She heard voices before she reached the door, James and Rebecca, but also a third voice that made her stop short. "Richard Miller. The statute of limitations has expired," Richard was saying. "Even with your evidence, they can't touch us for Robert's death." "The statute never runs out on murder." Rebecca's voice was cold. "And I have proof it wasn't suicide or a hunting accident." "After 15 years, James this time, his voice strained. "Why come back now? Why not just stay dead like everyone believed?" "Because of her." Rebecca's words carried clearly through the door. "Because Catherine deserves to know what kind of family she's marrying into, what kind of man you really are. And what kind of man am I, Rebecca?" James's tone had changed, becoming something harder, more like his father's. The kind who helped cover up his own uncle's murder. The kind who watched his father's men run his wife off the road and said nothing. The kind who... A sharp sound interrupted her. Catherine had heard enough. She pulled out her phone, dialed Detective Chen's number, and pushed open the door. The scene inside froze like a tableau. Richard Miller by the window, James near the desk, Rebecca backed against the wall. The leather briefcase lay open, its contents scattered across the bed, old photographs, legal documents, what looked like a handwritten letter. "Catherine." James recovered first. "This isn't what it looks like." She kept her voice steady. "It looks like a family meeting, one where you're deciding how to handle the latest threat to the Miller reputation." "You don't understand," Richard began, but Catherine cut him off. "I understand everything now. Robert Miller found evidence of corruption, threatened to expose it, just like Rebecca did later, just like Margaret might have, if you hadn't silenced her first." James took a step toward her. "Catherine, please. Everything I did was to protect the family." Rebecca's laugh was bitter. "Tell her the truth, James. Tell her what happened the night Robert died. Tell her who was really with him on that hunting trip." Catherine watched James's face, saw the moment something broke behind his eyes. "I was 22, he said quietly. Just finished law school, Uncle Robert. He'd found proof that father had been bribing judges, burying evidence in environmental cases. He said he couldn't keep quiet anymore. James. Richard's voice held a warning. No, father. No more lies. James sank into a chair, suddenly looking old. It wasn't supposed to be murder. We were just going to scare him, make him understand about family loyalty. But he wouldn't back down. When he turned to leave, father raised the rifle. The silence that followed was heavy with 15 years of guilt. And you helped cover it up, Catherine said. Made it look like an accident, just like you did with Rebecca's car years later. I loved you, James said. But Catherine wasn't sure if he was talking to her or Rebecca. Both of you. But family. The Miller name. Is that what you tell yourself at night? Rebecca moved to the bed, gathered the scattered papers. These are copies, by the way. The originals are already with the FBI. 15 years of evidence. Every case you buried, every witness you silenced, every life you destroyed to protect the family name. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. That would be Detective Jen, Catherine said. She's very interested in reopening Robert Miller's case. Richard moved suddenly, reaching into his jacket. Rebecca tensed, but he pulled out only a phone. Our lawyers will bury this, he said, starting to dial. They always do. Not this time. Catherine moved to block the door. Some things can't be buried, Richard. Some foundations are too rotten to repair. The sirens stopped outside the hotel. Footsteps pounded down the hallway. You could have been a Miller, Richard said, his voice almost sad. Catherine touched her engagement ring, the one that had marked 3 generations of Miller wives. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled it off. No, she said. I couldn't. The Miller family tree sprawled across the archive table like an architectural blueprint, its branches telling a story darker than Catherine had imagined. She'd found it in the Historical Society's records while researching the family's connection to Boston's legal establishment. But what caught her eye weren't the prestigious names and dates. It was the pattern of marriages and, more importantly, the disappearances. Your instincts were right, Eleanor Matthews, the Society's chief archivist, said quietly. She'd known Catherine for years, through various restoration projects. The Millers have been practicing law in Boston since 1875, but their real power comes from strategic marriages. Catherine traced a line with her finger. Margaret wasn't the first prosecutor who married into the family and then suddenly retired. No. Eleanor pulled out more documents, yellowed newspaper clippings, court records, society announcements. In every generation, there's at least one marriage to someone who could expose family secrets, someone who then conveniently changes their mind. The pattern was clear once you knew where to look. In 1922, Elizabeth Crawford, a muckraking journalist investigating corporate corruption, married Thomas Miller II. She never published another article. In 1945, Helen Stevens, a promising young district attorney, married William Miller. Within a month, she'd resigned her position, and in 1980, Margaret Chen, top of her class at Harvard Law, married Richard Miller. They choose strong women, Eleanor observed. Independent thinkers, crusaders for justice, then they break them. Catherine thought of Margaret's trembling hands, of Rebecca's scar, of her own almost marriage. But why? If they're so worried about exposure, why not marry? Safe choices. Because the greatest threat to power isn't an outside enemy. It's someone who might inherit authority and then reform it. Eleanor spread out another document, this one detailing the Miller and Associates client list over the decades. The firm has represented every major corporate interest in New England since the Industrial Revolution. They've buried evidence of toxic dumping, worker deaths, judicial bribes. They need to ensure that the next generation will protect those secrets. Photographs slipped from between the pages. Robert Miller as a young law student, accepting a public service award. His speech was quoted in the caption, The law should serve justice, not power. Robert was different, Eleanor said. He believed in using the family's influence for good, and we know what happened to him. Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Chen. Found something in Robert's old cases. Meet me at the courthouse? Go, Eleanor said, gathering the documents. But Catherine, be careful, I knew Robert. He thought he could change the system from within. Look where that got him. The courthouse was nearly empty. Most of its daily drama concluded. Detective Chen waited in the records room, surrounded by boxes of old case files. Robert Miller was building a RICO case, she said, without preamble, not just against corporate polluters, but against his own family's firm. He had evidence of a decades-long pattern of corruption. That's why they killed him, Catherine said. Not just because of one case, but because he threatened the entire system. Yes, but here's what's interesting. The detective pulled out a file. 2 days before he died, Robert changed his will, left everything to a trust controlled by his girlfriend, a young lawyer named Rebecca Taylor. Catherine felt the pieces, clicking into place. That's why James married her. The family needed to control that trust, and why they tried to kill her when she started asking questions. Chen spread out more documents. But Rebecca was smarter than they expected. She spent the last 15 years building her own RICO case. Every client, every bribe, every cover-up, she has proof of all of it. And now, she's back to finish what Robert started. Catherine studied the detective's face. But that's not all you found, is it? Chen hesitated. There's something else. Something about your father's construction company. Catherine's heart stuttered. What about it? In the 90s, there was a series of accidents on his renovation projects. Workers hurt. 1 death. The cases all went to Miller and Associates. They were handled. No. Catherine shook her head. My father would never. He might not have known. The Millers are very good at making problems disappear. Chen's voice softened. But Catherine, I think this is why James chose you. Why the family approved the marriage so quickly. You're not just an architect. You're the daughter of someone they already have leverage over. Catherine thought of her father's warning about the Millers, the pain in his eyes when he'd told her to be careful. Had that been guilt she'd seen? Knowledge of his own compromises? Her phone buzzed again. James, please come home. We need to talk about the family. Home. The word felt hollow now. She thought of the townhouse she'd been sharing with James, its perfect restoration masking rot in the foundations. Just like the Miller family itself. What are you going to do? Chen asked. Catherine touched her bare finger where the engagement ring had been. The same thing I do with any dangerous structure. Document the damage and warn people away. They'll try to stop you. Yes. Catherine gathered the files, her architect's mind already planning, measuring, calculating angles of attack. But some things need to come down. Sometimes demolition is the only safe option. As if in response, her phone buzzed one final time. A message from Rebecca. Found Robert's last letter. Now we have everything we need. Time to bring down the house of Miller. Are you ready? Catherine thought of all the buildings she'd restored, all the hidden damage she'd uncovered and repaired. But some structures couldn't be saved. Some foundations were too corrupt to support anything new. Ready, she typed back and hit send. The USB drive glowed faintly blue on Catherine's desk, innocent-looking despite the devastating evidence it contained. Rebecca had hidden it inside a hollowed-out copy of Restoration Architecture Theory and Practice. A private joke that Catherine might have appreciated under different circumstances. 15 years of data, Rebecca explained via encrypted video call, her face grave on Catherine's laptop screen. Every case the Millers buried, every judge they bribed, every witness they silenced. But the real proof is in the financial records. Catherine opened the first spreadsheet, and her architectural training kicked in, patterns emerging from raw data like structural flaws in an old building's blueprint. Money flowing from Miller and Associates to offshore accounts, then returning. through a maze of shell companies to pay off strategic allies. Look at the dates, Rebecca directed. Every major payout corresponds to a case that threatened to expose them, including your father's construction accidents. Catherine's fingers froze over the keyboard. There it was in black and white, Windsor Restoration LLC, listed as a specialized client, with a series of payments marked as regulatory compliance consultation. My father, Catherine said slowly, he really didn't know. The Millers are experts at keeping their clients ignorant of the bigger picture. Your father probably thought they were just handling routine liability issues. Rebecca's voice softened. That's how they maintain power. Everyone owns a small piece of guilt, but no one sees the whole pattern. A knock at Catherine's office. Her door made both women fall silent. James stood in the doorway, looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. Catherine, please. His voice cracked. Whatever Rebecca's told you. Is it all here, James? Catherine gestured to the USB drive. Everything you helped cover up? Or should I ask about the real reason you chose me? Was it my father's company, or just the family tradition of marrying women who might expose your secrets? James stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. You don't understand. Your father killed his own brother. Rebecca cut in from the screen. And you helped cover it up, just like you helped stage my accident when I found proof. I never wanted. James stopped, staring at the screen. You kept records all this time. Robert taught me well. Rebecca's smile was sharp as broken glass. He knew what your family was capable of. That's why he changed his will, why he left me everything. He knew I'd finish what he started. By destroying his own family's legacy? By exposing the truth, Catherine said. The same truth you've been running from since you were 22 years old. James sank into a chair, suddenly looking ancient. Do you know what it's like? Growing up knowing your father is capable of murder, watching him destroy anyone who threatens the family name, I thought. If I played along, I could protect people, guide things from the inside. Like you protected me? Rebecca's voice was ice. I warned you about the breaks, James whispered. I tried to stop it, but you didn't. Catherine stood, moving away from him. You let it happen, just like you were. Going to let it happen to me if I got too close to the truth. Her phone buzzed, a text from Detective Chen. Richard Miller just entered your building. As if on cue, heavier footsteps sounded in the hallway. James went pale. Catherine, he said urgently, you don't know what he's capable of. Actually, I do. She lifted the USB drive. It's all right here. Every case, every crime, every cover-up, including Robert's murder. The office door opened without a knock. Richard Miller filled the frame, impeccable in his bespoke suit, but his eyes were hard as granite. Catherine. His voice was smooth as ever. I see we're having a family meeting. How appropriate. His gaze fell on the laptop screen. Rebecca, still causing trouble from beyond the grave. Not beyond it, Rebecca replied. Right here in Boston. With enough evidence to bring down 3 generations of Miller corruption. Evidence? Richard's laugh was genuine. My dear, we're lawyers. Evidence has a way of becoming inadmissible in our hands. Not this time. Catherine held up her phone, showing the active call to Detective Chen. The FBI has copies of everything. Robert's murder, Rebecca's accident, the judicial bribes, all of it. It's over, Richard. Nothing's over. Richard's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. The Miller family has survived far worse than... Put the gun down, Father. Everyone turned. James had stood, and Catherine saw something new in his face, something that reminded her of the young man in those old photos with Rebecca before the Miller legacy had corrupted him. James. Richard's voice held a warning. Think about what you're doing. I have. For 15 years. James moved between his father and Catherine. Robert tried to tell me the night he died. He said our family's real legacy wasn't power or money. It was the corruption of everything we touched. He was right. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. You'd betray your own blood? Richard's hand tightened on the gun. "No, Father. I'm saving it," like Robert tried to do. James's voice strengthened. "Like Rebecca's been trying to do. Like Catherine made me finally understand." The siren stopped outside. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. "We're all going to prison," Richard said softly. "Maybe." James looked at Catherine, then Rebecca on the screen. "But at least we'll stop poisoning everyone we touch." The office door burst open. Detective Chen led a team of FBI agents inside, weapons drawn. Richard's gun clattered to the floor as they took him into custody. Catherine watched them lead both Miller men away, feeling the weight of generations of secrets lifting. Her phone buzzed one last time. A message from her father. "I just saw the news. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never knew." "I believe you," she typed back, then looked at Rebecca's image on the screen. "What happens now?" "Now?" Rebecca smiled, a real smile this time. "Now we rebuild. On a clean foundation this time." Catherine thought of all the buildings she'd restored, all the damaged structures she'd brought back to life. Some had to be torn down completely before they could be rebuilt. Some wounds couldn't heal until all the rot was cut away. She closed her laptop, picked up the USB drive, and walked out of her office into the clear autumn air. Tomorrow would bring questions, investigations, probably trials. But today she had finally done what every good architect must: identified a dangerous structure and prevented it from harming anyone else. The security camera footage played silently on Detective Chen's laptop, showing the ornate lobby of the Federal Reserve Building. Catherine watched herself enter at precisely 9:15 a.m., wearing the same cream-colored suit she'd chosen for her final wedding fitting. The timestamp blinked in the corner, 3 days before the interrupted ceremony. "Everything's set," Rebecca said through the encrypted line, her voice tight with 15 years of anticipated justice. "The documents are in place. Once Richard takes the bait, he will," Catherine interrupted, studying the footage. "The Millers built their empire on knowing everyone's secrets. He won't be able to resist learning mine." The next clip showed Richard Miller arriving at 9:30, exactly as they'd predicted. His silver Bentley glided to the curb like a shark approaching prey. The federal banking regulators Catherine had tipped off were already in position, hidden among the mourning crowd of financial workers. "The beauty of corruption," Detective Chen observed, "is how it makes powerful men predictable. They're so used to controlling the game, they never expect to be played." Catherine thought of James, probably, pacing in his Beacon Hill office right now, wondering why she'd requested access to her father's company records. The trail they'd created was perfect, just suspicious enough to draw attention, just subtle enough to seem real. "Camera 3, Rebecca directed, and Chen switched feeds. The footage showed Catherine at a desk, reviewing documents with a federal banking officer, one of Chen's agents in disguise. Richard Miller appeared in the background, watching through the glass partition, his face a mask of calculated concern. "Look at his hands," Rebecca said. "The way he keeps touching his jacket pocket. He's already planning how to make this disappear." Catherine remembered the weight of his gaze that morning, the practiced smile when he'd accidentally encountered her in the lobby. "Catherine, what a surprise," he'd said, as if he hadn't followed her there. "Is everything all right with the Windsor accounts?" The next clip showed their carefully staged conversation. No audio, but it didn't matter. They all knew the script. Catherine's seemingly reluctant revelation about irregularities in her father's books. Richard's fatherly concern, his offer to handle everything quietly to protect both families' reputations. Classic Miller manipulation, Rebecca noted. Using people's love against them. That's how he controlled James after Robert's murder, threatened to expose everyone who'd ever taken family money. The final footage showed Richard making a call the moment Catherine left. Exactly as they'd anticipated. Phone records would show. It went to the same judge who'd buried evidence in Robert's case, who'd sealed Rebecca's accident report, who'd been on the Miller payroll for 20 years. "Tomorrow's the wedding," Chen said, stopping the playback. You know they'll try to stop this before you reach the altar. Catherine smiled grimly. That's exactly what we're counting on. Richard won't risk me having a public change of heart. He'll want to handle this tonight on his terms. Her phone buzzed right on cue. James asking her to meet at the Harborview Hotel, the same hotel where Rebecca had survived her last confrontation with the Millers 15 years ago. It's almost poetic, Rebecca said. All those years, Richard, spent teaching James how to make problems disappear. Now James is going to make his father's whole empire disappear instead. You're sure about James? Chen asked. People don't often choose justice over family. Catherine thought of the young lawyer in those old photographs with Rebecca, the idealistic son who'd watched his uncle die for trying to expose the truth. James has been waiting 15 years to make this choice. He just needed someone to show him it wasn't too late. Her phone buzzed again, a text from her father. The FBI just left. They showed me everything. God, Catherine, I never knew what they were really doing with those case settlements. He's a good man, Rebecca said softly. The Millers are experts at using good people's ignorance against them. Catherine gathered her things, checking the recording device disguised as a pendant. In 12 hours, she was supposed to become Catherine Miller. Instead, she would help end 3 generations of corruption and abuse of power. Remember, Chen said as Catherine stood to leave, if anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. Catherine interrupted. The Millers built their power on using people's better natures against them. Love, loyalty, the desire to protect family. But those same qualities can be turned into weapons. You just have to know where to aim them. She touched the pendant, thinking of James waiting at the hotel, probably rehearsing his father's practiced lines about family duty and necessary sacrifices. But some sacrifices weren't necessary. Some loyalty was just another word for complicity. Time. To go, she said, lifting her bag. We have a wedding to crash. The recorded conversation played softly in Catherine's earpiece as she moved through her final wedding preparations. Richard Miller's voice as smooth as aged brandy. James, son, I've been thinking about Catherine's recent activities. Perhaps we should consider postponing the wedding. The recording had been made just hours ago in Richard's wood-paneled study, captured by the bugs Rebecca had planted months before. James's response was exactly what they'd hoped for. No, father, any delay would raise questions. Besides, Catherine's just doing her job. Architects have to verify structural integrity. Catherine adjusted her veil in the bridal suite mirror, remembering how carefully they'd planted that cover story. For weeks, she'd made a show of investigating old buildings connected to Miller and Associates, claiming concerns about foundation issues. It had given her the perfect excuse to access records, ask questions, meet with witnesses. Structural integrity. Richard's laugh crackled through the earpiece. Is that what she told you she was checking at the Federal Reserve Building? Wake up, James. She's been meeting with banking regulators, asking about the Bradley case settlement funds. A knock at the bridal suite door made Catherine freeze. Her mother entered, carrying the antique lace garter that had been in their family for generations. For a moment, Catherine felt a stab of guilt. Her mother had no idea that the perfect society wedding she'd helped plan was about to become something very different. You look troubled, darling, her mother said, setting down the garter. Having doubts? Catherine smiled, thinking of the USB drive hidden in her bouquet, the federal agents posing as wedding guests, Detective Chen coordinating everything from the church basement. Not about what needs to be done. The recording continued. That Windsor girl is too much like Rebecca, Richard growled. Too interested in old records, in questions better left unasked. You know what happened the last time someone dug too deeply into our archives. Yes, father, James replied, his voice carrying a weight that only Catherine and Rebecca would understand. I remember exactly what happened to Uncle Robert. Catherine's phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Security camera shows Richard heading to the church early. He's carrying a briefcase. Another buzz from Detective Chen. Briefcase likely contains documents from Robert's case. My team spotted him removing files from his home safe last night. The recording crackled again. Handle it, James, tonight, before she has a chance to. The audio cut off abruptly. Catherine touched her earpiece. What happened? Signal's dead. Rebecca replied. All the bugs in Richard's study just went dark. Catherine felt her pulse quicken. Had they been discovered? She glanced at her mother, still fussing with the wedding dresses train. Mom, could you give me a moment? I need to make a phone call. The moment the door closed, her phone lit up with rapid texts. Detective Chen. Richard's security team is sweeping the study. They're using professional gear, Rebecca. Doesn't matter, we have enough. But Catherine, be careful. If they found the bugs. James, my father knows. Get out now. Catherine's hands stayed steady as she typed back, No, stick to the plan. Everything in place? Rebecca, FBI teams in position. Digital copies of all evidence safely uploaded. Chen's people have the church surrounded. James. Catherine, please. He'll do anything to stop this. She thought of Robert Miller, of Rebecca's scar, of all the lives the Miller family had destroyed in the name of protecting their legacy. That's what we're counting on. A final text from Detective Chen. Richard's briefcase contains a gun. Spotted on security scan. How do you want to handle this? Catherine touched her bouquet, feeling the USB drive hidden among the roses. 15 years of evidence, of buried crimes, of destroyed lives, all ready to be exposed. Perfect, she typed. Back. Now he'll be carrying an illegal weapon when we arrest him. Her mother knocked again. Catherine, the string quartet is ready. They're asking if you want to review the processional music. Be right there. Catherine checked her reflection one last time. The vintage dress was perfect. The veil arranged. Just so. She looked every inch the blushing Miller bride, exactly the kind of woman Richard and his generations of corrupt patriarchs had always tried to control. Her phone buzzed one last time. Rebecca, ready? Catherine thought of all the architectural projects she'd overseen, all the dangerous structures she'd condemned to protect public safety. Sometimes the most dangerous buildings were the most beautiful ones, all perfect facades. And hidden rot. Ready, she replied. Time to bring down the house. The original marriage license felt heavy in Rebecca's hands as she stood before the cathedral's oak doors. 15 years of waiting crystallized into this moment. Through the wooden panels, she could hear the string quartet playing pachelbels. Canon could picture Catherine walking down the aisle, could imagine Richard Miller's face when he realized his carefully constructed world was about to collapse. All teams in position. Detective Chen's voice came through her earpiece. Exits covered, federal agents ready. Rebecca straightened her black suit, touching the scar on her arm one last time. Catherine, ready, came the calm reply. James just took his place at the altar. His father's in the front pew, briefcase at his feet. The marriage license bore the official seal of Boston City Hall, dated June 12, 2010. But more importantly, it carried a validation stamp from last week, proof that no divorce had ever been filed, that every document Richard had produced to the contrary was a forgery. Rebecca nodded to the uniformed officer beside her, and he pulled open the cathedral door. The scene inside was exactly as they'd planned. Catherine radiant in her vintage gown, James pale but resolute at the altar, Richard Miller's hand inching toward his briefcase as he registered Rebecca's presence. The guest's whispers rose like a wave as she strode down the aisle. I object to this wedding, Rebecca announced, her voice carrying to the vaulted ceiling, because I can prove that James Miller is still legally married. To me, Richard stood, his practiced smile never wavering. My dear Rebecca, back from the dead. How dramatic. But I have documents proving your divorce was finalized years ago. Forgeries, Rebecca replied, holding up the marriage license. Just like the accident report from my car crash. Just like the hunting accident report from Robert Miller's murder. The whispers turned to gasps. In the front pew, Margaret Miller swayed slightly, her hand clutching her pearls. James stepped down from the altar, moving to stand beside Catherine. "Father," he said quietly, "it's over." Richard's smile tightened. "Nothing's over. This is just another desperate attempt by a disturbed woman to expose the truth," Catherine interrupted, reaching into her bouquet. The USB drive glinted in the stained glass light, like the truth about the Bradley case, the buried evidence, the judicial bribes. "The witnesses you silenced," Rebecca added. "The lives you destroyed, the son you murdered." Richard's hand closed around his briefcase. "You have no proof." "Actually," Detective Chen said, emerging from a side chapel with her badge displayed, "we have 15 years of proof. FBI agents are currently executing search warrants at Miller and Associates, your home office, and every location where you've hidden evidence. And we have this," James added, his voice stronger now. He reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Robert's last letter. The one you thought you'd destroyed. He gave it to me the night before the hunting trip, said to keep it safe in case anything happened to him." Richard's face went slack. You knew? All this time?" "I was a coward," James replied. "I chose family loyalty over justice. But Robert was right. Our family's real legacy is corruption. It ends today." Richard moved with surprising speed for his age, the gun appearing in his hand. But before he could aim, Catherine's father tackled him from behind. The weapon skittered across the marble floor as federal agents swarmed in from every entrance. "Richard Miller," Detective Chen announced, producing handcuffs. "You're under arrest for the murder of Robert Miller, the attempted murder of Rebecca Taylor Miller, conspiracy to commit fraud, judicial corruption." As the charges continued, Catherine watched her almost father-in-law's facade finally crack. The mighty Richard Miller, who had spent decades wielding power from the shadows, looked suddenly old and small in the handcuffs. "The foundation is rotted," Catherine said softly, using the words she'd written in so many structural assessment reports. "The whole structure has to come down." "We'll rebuild," James replied, loosening his bow tie. "Starting with the truth. About Robert, about everything." Rebecca stepped forward, still holding the marriage license that had started it all. 15 years ago, you told me that being a Miller meant understanding the price of power. You were right, Richard. I just don't think you expected to be the one paying it." As the agents led Richard away, Margaret Miller approached Rebecca. "I tried to warn you," she said, her voice trembling. "That day at the gala, I tried to—" "I know," Rebecca said gently. "You can tell the whole story now. We all can." The cathedral slowly emptied, guests filing out to where reporters were already gathering. Catherine stood in her wedding dress, surrounded by the wreckage of one family's dynasty and the first fragments of truth. "What happens now?" James asked, looking lost but somehow lighter. Catherine thought of all the buildings she'd condemned, all the structures she'd rebuilt from. "The ground up. Now," she said, "we start over, with a clean foundation this time." The court documents filled an entire conference room at the Federal Building, each banker's box labeled with dates spanning 3 decades of Miller family corruption. Catherine sat with Detective Chen, reviewing charging documents that read like an architect's assessment of a condemned building, structural failures, hidden defects, catastrophic damage. 47 counts of conspiracy, Chen said, sliding across the federal indictment. 18 counts of witness tampering, 3 counts of attempted murder, and 1 count of first-degree murder for Robert Miller. The Boston Globe lay on the table between them, its headline stark, "Miller and Associates Dynasty of Corruption Exposed." Below, a photo showed Richard Miller being led from the cathedral in handcuffs, his perfect facade finally cracked. The DA's office has reopened every case Miller and Associates handled in the past 30 years, Chen continued. James's cooperation is making it easier to untangle the web of bribes and cover-ups. Catherine picked up another document, a sworn affidavit from Margaret Miller. The elegant society matron's testimony was devastating. Decades of watched silences, of choices made under threat, of knowing exactly what her husband was capable of. She kept a secret diary, Chen said softly. Every threat, every cover-up, every time Richard used family loyalty to force compliance. It's all there. Catherine thought of the trembling hands, the averted eyes, the warnings that had seemed so cryptic before. She was building her own case all those years, just like Rebecca. Speaking of Rebecca, Chen pushed forward a final document, a judicial order declaring Rebecca's marriage to James legally valid, nullifying any fraudulent divorce papers. She's technically still Mrs. Miller, though I doubt she'll keep the name. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from James. Father's taking a plea deal. 25 years. He'll die in prison. Another message followed. He wanted me to ask you one last time about keeping this in the family. Catherine thought of her own father's testimony about the construction accident settlements, of his shock at learning how the Millers had used his ignorance against him. Some families needed to end. The press is calling it the biggest legal scandal in Boston history, Chen said, gathering files. Every major news outlet wants interviews. The FBI's already talking about a task force to investigate similar family law firms in other cities. And the clients? Catherine asked, thinking of all the corporations whose secrets the Millers had buried, scrambling to make deals. Bradley Chemical's CEO turned himself in this morning. 3 more corporations have already approached the SEC about voluntary disclosures. Chen smiled grimly. Amazing how quickly rats abandon a sinking ship. Catherine's phone buzzed again. Rebecca this time. Just met with Robert's old environmental group. They want to revive his cases, continue his work. Interested in helping? Before she could reply, her father appeared in the conference room doorway. William Windsor looked older than he had a week ago, but somehow unburdened. The investigators finished with my company records, he said, sitting heavily. 20 years of settlements I never fully understood, lives I could have saved if I'd asked more questions. You didn't know, Dad. No, but I should have. He picked up the globe, studying Richard Miller's photograph. We all should have. We let them build their power because it was easier not to look too closely, because they made the problems go away. Catherine touched his hand, thinking of all the times they'd worked together restoring old buildings, checking foundations, ensuring structural integrity. We can rebuild, she said. The right way this time. Her phone lit up with another text from James. Meeting with the Bar Association tomorrow. Voluntary disbarment. It's time to step away from law entirely. What will you do? She typed back. Robert. Left notebooks full of environmental cases that need to be reopened. Rebecca thinks we can use the Miller resources for something good finally. If you're willing to help assess the damage. Catherine smiled, recognizing the architectural metaphor he'd borrowed from her. Damage assessment was the first step in any restoration project. Detective Chen gathered the last of the court documents. The grand jury convenes next week. Between Margaret's diary, James's testimony, and Rebecca's evidence, we'll be putting away more than just Richard Miller. Half the corrupt judges in Massachusetts are running scared. Good, Catherine said, standing. Sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to tear it down completely. She looked around the conference room at the boxes of evidence. Paper. Trails of lives destroyed, justice denied, power abused. The Miller legacy laid bare at last. Her phone buzzed one final time. Rebecca. Ready to start rebuilding? Catherine thought of the Cathedral, where she'd almost become a Miller bride, of all the facade she'd learned to see through, of the strength that came from exposing corruption rather than hiding it. Ready, she replied. Let's lay a new foundation. The newspaper coverage spread across Catherine's drafting table like architectural plans, each headline mapping the collapse of Boston's most powerful legal dynasty. The New York Times. Miller scandal exposes generational corruption in legal system. The Wall Street Journal, Miller and Associates fall triggers national review of family law firms. The Boston Globe's investigative series, House of Cards, The Miller Legacy of Power and Corruption. They're calling it the wedding that shattered a dynasty, Rebecca said, setting down her coffee and picking up the latest clipping. 3 weeks had passed since the interrupted ceremony, and the aftershocks were still rippling through Boston's power structure. Page 6 is more interested in the society angle, Catherine noted, gesturing to a gossip column. Apparently I'm either a heroic whistleblower or a calculating infiltrator who destroyed one of Boston's great families. Why not both? Rebecca's smile had lost its sharp edges lately, though they seemed less interested in the actual crimes than in the drama of it all. The latest profile in Boston Magazine lay open between them. The Fall of the House of Miller, a tale of two women who exposed generational corruption. The article detailed their parallel journeys, Rebecca's 15-year quest for justice, Catherine's systematic exposure of the family's rot, complete with dramatic photos of the cathedral. Confrontation. Have you seen the legal journals? Rebecca asked, pulling out her tablet. The American Bar Association is using the Miller case as a catalyst for reviewing how family-controlled firms operate. They're calling for new oversight mechanisms, independent audits. Cultural change, Catherine finished, thinking of how many times she'd written those words in restoration proposals. Sometimes exposing the damage is just the first step. Her phone buzzed. James, texting from the courthouse. Just finished testifying to the grand jury. Father's former partners are falling over themselves to make deals. 30 years of secrets coming out. The media storm had been hardest on him. Boston's legal circles had branded him a traitor to his class, while reform advocates hailed him as a whistleblower. The truth, Catherine knew, was more complex, a man finally choosing justice over the toxic loyalty that had shaped his life. Margaret's book deal was announced this morning, Rebecca said, pulling up another article. Silence. In the House of Miller, a memoir of power and complicity. Simon & Schuster is fast-tracking it for publication. Catherine thought of James's mother, finally free to tell her story. The advance would go to a new foundation supporting women trapped in abusive power structures, a way of atoning for her years of enforced silence. Her office phone rang. Detective. Chen with an update. Bradley Chemical's CEO is naming names. 3 more judges have resigned. The FBI is expanding their task force to cover similar family law dynasties in New York and Chicago. The ripple effect we talked about, Catherine said, thinking of how structural failure in one support could compromise an entire building. More like a tsunami, Chen replied. Every power structure that relied on Miller-style corruption is suddenly vulnerable. Your father's construction company isn't the only business coming forward with stories of settled cases and buried evidence. Catherine's inbox pinged with a new email, the American Institute of Architects requesting her participation in a panel on ethics in architecture, lessons from the Miller scandal. They wanted her to discuss how architectural assessment principles could be applied to evaluating institutional integrity. You should do it, Rebecca said, reading over her shoulder. Your restoration metaphors are already showing up in reform proposals. Structural integrity in legal institutions, foundation assessment of judicial systems. The language of renovation is spreading, Catherine mused, though not everyone appreciates the demolition phase. Her social circle had fractured along predictable lines. Old money families who'd benefited from Miller influence had quietly withdrawn party invitations. Reform-minded professionals sought her expertise on exposing institutional corruption. Younger society members privately reached out with their own stories of family power abused. The Boston Beacon's society page, which had once announced her engagement with such flourish, now ran weekly updates on the scandal's social fallout. Today's headline asked, "Can Boston's old guard survive the Miller revelation?" "They're missing the point," Rebecca said, closing the society pages. "It's not about survival, it's about transformation." Catherine's phone lit up with another text from James. "Just met with Robert's old environmental law team. They want to revive his campaign against corporate pollution. Use the Miller resources for something good, finally. Time for renovation," Catherine typed back, smiling at how naturally they'd both adopted architectural metaphors. "Speaking of renovation," Rebecca said, "have you seen the proposals for reforming the DA's office? They're talking about independent oversight committees, transparent case review processes, structural changes." Catherine nodded, spreading out her drafting papers. "But first, we have to finish documenting all the damage. You can't rebuild until you understand exactly what failed." She looked at the news coverage surrounding them. Each headline, a brick in the foundation of change. Each revelation, a beam. Supporting reform. The Miller dynasty had fallen, but something stronger could rise from its ruins. Her phone buzzed one last time. Detective Chen. "Ready to start rebuilding?" The architectural plans for the Robert Miller Memorial Legal Aid Center spread across Catherine's new office table, the blue lines crisp against white paper. 6 months after the wedding that never was, she found herself designing not just buildings, but symbols of transformation. "The original Miller and Associates building," she explained to the board of directors, "will be completely renovated. We're preserving the historic facade, but restructuring the interior to create open, transparent spaces. Glass walls, communal areas, public access to legal resources." Rebecca, now executive director of the Miller Foundation for Legal Reform, nodded approvingly. Robert would have loved the symbolism, taking a fortress of private power and turning it into a center for public justice. The renovation plans reflected every lesson they'd learned. The dark, mahogany-lined corridors, where secrets had festered, would become sun-filled collaborative spaces. The private chambers where judges had been bribed would transform into public legal clinics. Richard Miller's corner office, now evidence in multiple federal investigations, would become a library of environmental law dedicated to Robert's memory. "The structural assessment is complete," Catherine continued, turning to the core architectural plans. "The foundation is solid. It's the internal systems that needed replacement. Rather like Boston's legal establishment itself." James, sitting quietly at the back of the room, smiled at the metaphor. He'd found his own path to renovation, working with Rebecca to resurrect his uncle's environmental cases. His testimony had helped secure his father's conviction, and his cooperation had exposed decades of institutional corruption. Now he taught legal ethics at Boston College, using his family's story as a cautionary tale. Margaret Miller had found her voice as well. Her memoir had sparked a national conversation about complicity and courage in powerful families. The foundation she'd established with the proceeds was helping other women break free from systems of controlled silence. Catherine's father had transformed Windsor Restoration into a leader in ethical construction practices, working with oversight. Committees to establish new standards for transparency in development projects. The Miller scandal had taught them all that renovation wasn't just about buildings, it was about the integrity of the systems within them. "We'll preserve these carved stones," Catherine indicated on the plans, "but add an inscription. Justice, like architecture, must stand in the light." It's from Robert's last letter to James. The board members, a diverse group of legal reformers, community activists, and oversight experts, nodded approval. The Miller name would remain on the building, but transformed from a symbol of power into a reminder of the cost of corruption and the possibility of redemption. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen. "Federal task force using your structural assessment model to evaluate other legal dynasties. You've started something." Looking up from the architectural plans, Catherine caught Rebecca's eye. They shared a moment of quiet understanding, two women who'd chosen to tear down a corrupt structure so something better could rise in its place. "The renovation begins next month," Catherine told the board, rolling up the plans. "We're not just rebuilding a building, we're creating a blueprint for change." Through the window, she could see the Boston skyline, still standing but transformed by what they now knew about the power structures within its buildings. Some renovations went deeper than stone and steel. Some changes reshaped not just spaces, but the very foundations of justice. Catherine looked at Rebecca, saw her own determination mirrored there. "Always," she replied. "That's what architects do." The wedding album held a different kind of ceremony, intimate, honest, without pretense. 1 year after the Cathedral confrontation, Rebecca and Thomas Chen exchanged vows in the garden of Catherine's restored Victorian home. The photographs captured moments of genuine joy. Rebecca radiant in a simple cream suit, Thomas beaming as he placed his grandmother's ring on her finger, their shared looks of hard-won happiness. Catherine had given away the bride, a choice that felt right to both women. They had become something more than friends, more than allies, sisters forged in the crucible of truth-telling. The small gathering included Detective Chen, Catherine's parents, and James, who had found his own peace in supporting the union of his former wife to the man who had helped expose his family's corruption. One photo showed Margaret Miller arriving late to the ceremony, tentative but welcomed. Her gift to the couple was Robert's old case files, preserved in secret all these years, a final piece of truth restored to its rightful place. In the picture, Rebecca held Margaret's hands, both women's eyes bright with understanding. The last page held a simple shot. Catherine and Rebecca sitting on the garden steps at sunset, champagne glasses raised to the future. Behind them, Boston's skyline glowed golden, its buildings standing straighter somehow, as if the city itself had been unburdened of old secrets. Inside the album's cover, Rebecca had written a note. "Some ceremonies mark endings, others mark beginnings. The truest ones do both. Thank you for helping me find my way to this one." Catherine touched the words, thinking how different this celebration had been from the cathedral wedding that never was. Some foundations had to crack for better ones to be built. Some endings made room for truer beginnings. The holiday card captured them all on the steps of the Robert Miller Memorial Legal Aid Center. Catherine and her father flanking Rebecca and Thomas. Margaret Miller standing proudly beside James Detective. Chen grinning from the end. Behind them, the renovated building's glass walls gleamed in the winter light, its new inscription clearly visible. "Justice, like architecture, must stand in the light." 2 years had transformed more than just the building. Rebecca and Thomas had a 6-month-old daughter named Robin, in subtle tribute to Robert. James taught ethics at the law school, his students dissecting the Miller case with an earnestness that would have made his uncle proud. Margaret's foundation had helped 20 women escape abusive power structures, each success a small restoration of her own voice. Catherine's note inside the card read, "Sometimes family is what we build, not what we inherit. Sometimes the strongest foundations rise from the ruins of what we thought we wanted." The photograph showed not just faces, but the architecture of new relationships, the way Rebecca leaned comfortably against Thomas, how Margaret's hand rested easily on James's shoulder, the natural closeness between Catherine and the group she'd chosen as family. Even the building behind them seemed to embrace them all, its renovated facade a testament to the possibility of transformation. On the back, in Catherine's architectural hand, "Season's greetings from the house that truth rebuilt." Author's note, while this story is a work of fiction, its themes echo through countless real institutions where power and silence have worked hand in hand. In researching this narrative, I encountered dozens of stories about family legal dynasties, architectural firms, and financial empires where the facade of respectability masked generations of corruption. But I also found hope in the whistleblowers, investigators and truth-tellers who risked everything to expose systemic abuse. Like Catherine's beloved buildings, human institutions require regular inspection, maintenance, and sometimes complete renovation. The courage to examine our foundations, to identify structural weakness, and to rebuild with integrity is what allows both architecture and justice to endure. To those who choose truth over power, who risk demolition in service of reconstruction, who build new families from the rubble of old dynasties, this story is dedicated to you.